Okay, good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen from GE2 classes, and I hope you were able to attend the webinar on LMS for those who are still finding their way on within the system. So I hope that attending it has helped you a lot. Okay, so good evening. Please bear with the shine on my head. And this is still your teacher, just a bit clean looking. I feel a bit naked without my beard and mustache. So, um, okay, so I had headaches for the whole afternoon just reading our text, the visual reading textbook in PDF. Whoa, it's a lot, but I've learned a lot of things as well because it's my first time to handle the subject, so I have to experience the material myself. Okay, and somehow there's a lot of things I learned from the lesson itself, which I will about to share to you. So sit back, relax, enjoy the music. It's your DJ here on the uh, online class. Okay, so I hope you stay focused as well and try to take notes of the important things. I hope you have read the material ahead, so somehow it would be easier for you to follow through with these lessons. So, okay, let's begin where we left off yesterday. So, yesterday, let me see. hmm Okay. So we ended up yesterday with a topic on where is it? With this woman here. It's about techniques in of seeing as reading, like what we see here in the picture. That at this moment the photographer has decided to choose or to frame this part. So we can see here that the woman probably is the most uh, is the focus of this picture, being in the center together with the dog and being the biggest part. So this is what we call the scene or the frame. So we see the boots more, but we don't see the eyes of the woman. So there are many other things that could be seen here, like the steps or the plants behind or as a whole. So that's what we mean by the text. No, we are the ones creating the text. It's not just so the text here. Visual text is the one created by the one taking the photograph. So there's an act of selection, omission, framing, and evaluation to produce this kind of visual text. Okay, so remember that the two more important factors here are the attention and the focus. So what else? Okay, seeing time in motion. So we have here a number of elements that contribute to or facilitate the process of suturing the world to make a text. So we have colors that help us differentiate elements within our purview. For example, the green of the trees and the blue of the sky, shape and movements, and so on. So the still rectangular window as opposed to the amorphous waving tree branches. So the use of colors, the shape, the movement, and other elements which include texture, distance, and light does not occur in an unmediated way. However, rather to the extent to which and how we recognize, know, or use them are tied up with our immersion in and in relationship with our cultural world and its categories. So, and they also mention here that visual texts are ephemeral. Ephemeral means temporary. So they are never stable or really are in themselves. So moving on. Longer explanation here. So no matter how quickly we look at the same scene, the woman and the dog, again and again, no matter how much we're given to believe that these things are the same, so these things have changed in the intervals of perception. So, but we can't capture the movement of time, the changes that differentiate in one text from its successors. So, that text is only available to us as a frozen instant. So, it is a term like used a text in time. So, it doesn't really tell the whole story. So, the second point here is that the relationship between and the status of signs and text are always relational and contingent. So again, text is the whole image, while the signs are things that made up the text. So going back to the picture, the whole text is the woman, but the dog here, the boots, the hair, the plants are part of the signs. Okay, so what do you mean by text and intertext? Okay, so let me see. Okay, so these are the number of elements contribute, facilitate the process of string. So we have color, shape, movement, texture, distance. So what do you mean by text and intertext? Number one, we need to understand sign is anything that is treated as a meaningful part of the unit, that is the text. And when we say intertextuality is the use of other text to create new texts. Okay, so let's go back. For example, here we see pictures. What do you notice with these pictures? Of course, they are black and white. We see here one woman here together with other members, then with supposedly a partner. Then we have the dates. Okay, there, and with this woman. So with that picture alone, they are separate texts. But even though they are separate texts with different signs inside that text, like this girl here, that man there, who are they? So we can infer, we can do intertext, what do you call this? Intertexting. That together we look at the clues here and form a text, a general text about who she really is. Okay, so we can say that combining these particular photographs was not arbitrary because they are clearly connected through a content. So you see members of a family appear and reappear in them. There is also social function. They are all identifiable as being family portraits or photographs. So each of the photographs can be read as a sign, okay, within the larger text. So we can focus on one of the people, in, for example, the woman in figure. So you can read across these things, and together, if you are to look at them together, that's intertexting. So what else? A sign we have suggested is anything that is treated as a meaningful part of the unit in the text. We identify signs and group them together as if they were a unit by the process of relating available material to the other text and text types with which we are familiar from our memories and our cultural histories. So the use of other text to create new text is called intertextuality. So that's where the term came from. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So we can look at these pictures individually as a collection, but we can somehow, quote unquote, read a kind of narrative of the woman. We have the woman as a girl growing up, what it looks like to be a middle or upper or middle class family. It's part of the 20th century because we can identify from the hairstyles and the clothing that she had a relationship with, or perhaps was married to the man in another figure, in figure 1-4 here. So perhaps we can presume that they were married. Probably they had kids. So what else? We can tell that she was fair-skinned and probably lived in a sunny country. In 3 to 4 shots, she is wearing head covering of some kind. What's that for? Although this may be inexplicable in terms of the clothing fashions and conventions of the time. So you have to be sensitive about even these little signs that we can see within the text. The kind of clothing, the skin color, somehow because they can tell. Okay, what else? She probably grew up and lived in the country rather in the suburbs or a city, so you can presume because of the background in the picture. There's not much buildings around. Okay, the young man we take to be her brother, or in figure 1-4, is carrying rifles in the house. And physical environments all have rural characteristics, like the rough stone material of the house, the water tank in figure, the forest, sparsely housed scene, etc. So we might search these photographs for signs that would enable us to generalize about her history and life. She grew up and lived her life in the country, and probably it's her nationality could possibly be Australian, New Zealander, or South African. So a simple photograph in that sense can give a lot of signs that can give you a clue to produce some kind of a narrative. Okay, so next we move on to the text and genres. Okay, a genre is a term for text types. So these two concepts inform or influence visual activity. So going back. Okay, genres can be defined text types with structure meanings in certain ways through their association with a particular social purpose and social context. So normally we think of genres in terms of cultural fields and mediums such as fiction or film. We can say that, for instance, that this movie is a detective movie or science fiction or romance novels, action, horror, or erotic films. So each of these genres is identifiable in terms of its content, the narrative, the characterization, the discourses, values, and even the worldviews. So the question is, who creates these categories? Who categorizes them into genres? So, for example, you say this is a detective film, but not all detective films or plays, cartoons or video games for that matter reproduce or partake for all of these conventions. So we cannot just say that this is a detective movie, should be categorized as that because of this or this. But somehow, for example, the example here mentioned is about a movie, a particular movie that you can easily categorize into a genre of pornography. But you know that upon a closer look, it was even considered as an art movie, because it was, even though there were scenes that naked people are doing sexually, maybe sexually involved with somebody, but somehow upon deeper scrutiny of the story, the lines, they had considered it as a work of art in that sense. So those who categorizes movies somehow give it a different classification, distinct from other pornographic films. Okay, so moving on. Okay, the genres then, like intertexts, do not provide us with a special access to visual reality. Rather, they are frames and references that we use to negotiate, edit, evaluate, and in a sense, read the visual as a series of texts. And the way in which socio-cultural fields and institutions categorize people, places, events, and text in terms of certain genres, which are often based on or associated with valuative binaries such as the normal or the perverted, the civilized or the barbaric, the good, evil, art, pornography, this kind of genres, they orient and disposes us to see and read the visual world in particular ways. So in conclusion, what is important in any consideration of how we read the visual is that as readers, we are also what we call writers, selecting, editing, and framing all that we see. So most of the time, this work is unconscious, but even when our seeing is conscious and attentive, we will still make what we see by using the same kinds of techniques, such as selection and omission. So the limited in what we see by factors such as context, habitus, and cultural literacy. So in our next chapter, we will extend this inquiry to take into account what we could call the prosthetics of seeing. Okay, the guy at the back is my eldest son, seeing it. Okay, so moving on to visual technologies. Chapter 2. So in the previous chapter, we outlined some of the central mechanisms and techniques by which people make sense of what they see. So this chapter will take the mechanics of visual perception more specifically. So this includes the physiology and neurology of seeing. Physiology refers to the physical thing, neurology with the brain. Okay, so how do our bodies and brains engage in the world around us? And also the visual apparatuses and technologies people have developed over the centuries as aids for seeing. So we address the relationship between mechanism of perception and the types of visions they produce. So we also look at cultural frames such as photography, film, and 3D or interactive devices, and discuss their effect on seeing and perceiving. So central to the question of perception is how space and objects and movements in space are arranged, or what we call mapped, in the two-dimensional format that constitutes much of visual culture. So we also examine the ways in which post-Renaissance notions of seeing and mapping space have contributed to our understanding of the contemporary world. So somehow we cannot really deny the influence of the Renaissance period to our modern world. And finally, we discuss some of the technologies of reproducing line and image, particularly the digital technologies involved in seeing, and discuss their effect on our perspective in the world. So we'll just pick out some important definitions and explanations as we go through, because this is quite lengthy, so I hope you'll are patient enough to listen to this and take some important notes. Anyway, it's just temporary. As the days go by, these terms would hit you like nothing. Okay, so it means it has already embedded it. These will become embedded in your subconscious level. So at first you might be opening up dictionaries to understand the definition of terms, but as the days go by, you catch right away what it means. You don't need to check dictionaries or pause for a moment to ponder on the definitions of terms. Okay, moving on. Physiology and seeing. So this is a very scientific way of explaining how we interpret things that we see. So modern it's quite a tongue twister. Neurophysiology has determined that something like half the brain is dedicated to visual recognition. Can you imagine that? Half of our brain works just for visual recognition, and that how and what we see is tied up with our physiological structure. So our optic nerve comprises some 800,000 fibers, over 120 million rods, and over 7 million cones. So this means that an enormous amount of information can be transmitted swiftly and accurately to the brain. The eye focuses on the image on the retina, just as the camera focuses on the image on film. So the retina then recognizes the material which has been focused on it. Let me see, for example, here. Oop, where are you? There. Let me change a little about the music. I hear a particular sound. Okay. Okay, it's inside. Okay, moving on. So there. So genres. Okay, so before we proceed, so we're here already. Again, visual technologies. Okay. So, can you imagine how these things work? Retina organizes, so it's like the eye focuses on the image of the retina just like a camera focuses on an image on film. So the retina then organizes the material which has been focused on it by using its photoreceptors. These are light sensitive cells. So this is where the rods and the cones come into play. The rods processing dim light and the cones processing color and bright light. So the photoreceptors transform what we have captured visually into recognizable objects. And it is not until this work is completed that the image goes to the brain via the optic nerve to be processed further there. So you see how complicated these things work. So again, it's the process of visual perception is very physical. We have the eyes focusing on objects, then rods and cones processing matter, then the optic nerves are transporting the images that they have recorded to the brain, and then the brain recognizes it into an image. So that's why even Bill Gates recognizes the potential of the brain, that even until now no amount of computer can equal to the capacity of the human brain. No amount of camera, even no latest technology camera, can equate to the complexity of the human eye in capturing images. Okay, so moving on. So one important point here, somehow with some philosophers in the past, starting with Plato and Aristotle, they also have ideas about their explanation on this extra mission, according to Plato, that we see as the effect of a stream of light that flows out from the eye and strikes object outside of the body. And later on, Aristotle had different explanation. He argued that the water in the eye transmits an image through the soul, but it was really Rene Descartes who wrote that images are received by the external sense organs like the eyes and transmitted by the nerves to the brain, which is more of an accurate explanation scientifically today. So what else? Even on the late as early 20th century, the psychiatrist Simon Freud wrote that seeing is an activity that is ultimately derived from touching. But seeing is more than touching. It may Descartes may have used the analogy of feeling one's way through the world, like a blind person feeling its environment to make sense out of it. But it's beyond that. So seeing depended only on sensory experience, but instead he insisted that our senses are inadequate for perception. We need to make sense of what we see using rational thought. So though sight might appear to be a perfectly natural physical action, neurologists insist that both the ease with which we see and the apparent truth of what we see are deceptive. So thus seeing involves a huge amount of practice, and of course the application of an enormous portion of the brain. So sometimes we can be fooled by what is seen. So sometimes we perceive topographical maps and contour lines, for instance, as a three-dimensional and varied in depth, even though they are only lines on a flat page of the screen. So you look at here, we have an image here. Look at that. These are just lines, but you can see the contours here of like a hill or a mountain. You can see that this one is a bit lower compared to this one, the higher ones. But in reality, if you are to touch that, it's just plain lines written on a flat surface. Okay, so moving on. And despite the incredible receptive facility of the eye, it is fooled by light, distance, and intensity. So you look at figure 2.1, it's a common puzzle. Here, look at this. So which ones are longer? This one, this line, or that line? Ignore the arrows, just the line. On the first glance, what do you think is longer? Of course, we see this line as longer, but if you are to really measure them from point A to point B, it's just the same. Were you fooled as well? So that's the point of the author here. So even without measuring which line is longer, so we automatically presume that the lower line is longer, but of course they are of the same length. Similarly, we see the center of the star image as being much whiter and brighter than the paper outside the lines, although in fact there is no difference at all. Look at this. Which one is brighter, the light here or the light here? So we seem to presume that the light here is brighter, but actually there's no difference at all. So these are just examples how our brains and our eyes can be fooled by what we see. So we also see phenomenal sense. We see visions, mirages, and other imagined things. So for instance, also when we construct what we see gestaltically, this means that we do not see, even in neurophysiological terms, simply what is there. Instead, we are confronted with an incredible variety of possibilities. So this is something to do with the construction of the eye and the physiology of seeing. So our eye is constantly in motion, so we cannot constantly focus our gaze on one prolonged manner and produce an arrested image. So that is as is possible through technological imaging. Instead, our brains must make up an image out of constantly changing and often scanty clues, such as lines or signs. Ayan, so we have binocular vision, meaning dalawa, two. We have two eyes, but we see only one image. So what we do is we analyze an object by triangulating from our binocular vision. So it doesn't work like a camera does. A camera can adjust the whole frame in just one kind of focus. A camera can do that, but people with two eyes can never do that. We only focus on what we can triangulate. We are not monocular. So the ability to perceive distance, depth, and three-dimensionality. So we also have the blind spot, or we call it the macula. So given the problems inherent in receiving an image of what is actually out there, what there is to prevent us from making up everything we see idiosyncratically, that means uniquely. Why is there that virtually everyone would see the top line as longer than the lower line? So ang tawag natin ginatawag na grammar. We see the same things because we construct the same things. And we construct the same things because we use the same rules of construction. So these rules are physiologically to do with brain function. Okay, next topic is about seeing the world. Let's go back to our guide. And so the lesson will take up the mechanics of vision. This includes apparatuses, technologies people have developed over the centuries. Okay, so first we have tacit seeing. The relation to the world is a relation of presence in the world, of being in the world, and in the sense belonging to the world. So we see and perceive not because we are looking at the world from the outside, as it were, but because we are part of everything within our gaze. So everything that we see we are a part of it. So this everything includes our habitus, our background, tastes, tendencies, and dispositions, as well as our physical aptitude and status. So principle of constancy states that the past experiences of the viewer will influence what is being perceived. So how you see the world, yun yung topic. So what is happening? So wait. Okay, so tacit seeing here. includes everything that we see around us. For example, when we walk, of course, we use your eyes when you walk. Do you have to analyze everything that you step on? Somehow you would probably lose your balance when you do that. But we just walk and use our vision just enough to attain its particular purpose, to get from point A to point B. So that is somehow what it means by tacit seeing. Okay, so we see in short with the principle of constancy. Okay, so let me see. At times we all look without seeing. This is often necessary to allow us to get through each day. So moto example itong walking. So you cannot just focus on individual movements and moments of balance. You'll probably fall over. Mo na siya yung point. Okay, then so instead of carefully thinking about each movement of foot and leg while walking, we just focus analytically on each thing before our eyes while seeing. We tend to function according to a conscious unconsciousness. And so, you know why? Tacit knowing here, or tacit seeing is another term, allows us to function despite the fact that we are constantly being distracted. Our eyes are always being captured by something new across the way. Our attention is easily diverted by noises and other sensations. Our moods and prejudices color what we see. So if we just focus on each of them, everything, it might get in the way of attaining our particular purpose. I remember when we had our motorcycle, we just acquired our motorcycle, and it was before the COVID days. So we decided as a family, my wife and my two kids, to travel using our two motorcycles. So we decided to go to Camiguin. It was, I think, December. Yes, it was December vacation. So we decided to go out for like 5 days in motorcycles to Camiguin, Davao to Camiguin. Just can you imagine the trail? So riding all the way from Davao City, going to Buda, then Bukidnon. We slept on Quezon, Bukidnon. Then the next morning, early morning at 5 a.m. we headed our way to Camiguin. 20 minutes after, the motorcycle slid. It fell off a shoulder, and we fell down, me and my wife. So somehow I had like a very painful, I don't know, it's not dislocated, but they say it's a torn muscle, something on my shoulders, which lasted for a year. The pain lasted for a year, but still I was able to drive my way to Camiguin. I couldn't lift my left arm on my own. I have to support it just to reach to the handlebar, but I can drive more in a stable way once it gets there, but it loses the power to be raised. I can't raise my arm this way. Now, hopefully, I have fully recovered. But can you just imagine driving for 12 hours with a lot of new sights and things to see? Sometimes even if I'm driving the motorcycle, I'm tempted to just look around and enjoy the scenery. So that's an example of tacit seeing. I don't really have to think and process things deeply as I go along the way. 12 hours of absorbing different sights. So if you cannot do tacit seeing, I'm gonna go crazy. So on the other hand, seeing as literacy. So this is a bit different from tacit seeing. So tacit seeing is fine if we simply want to get through the day's responsibilities and activities, but it is insufficient if we want or need to make sense of what we are seeing. So as an analogy, considering the process of communicating in language, like in school, we were taught how to write letters, to learn shapes of letters, to look at words, to learn grammar and syntax. And with these literacies and discipline-specific training, we can write or read anything from abstract philosophy to shopping list. But if we are to develop similar skills in manipulation and interpretation of visual text, then we must again learn the number of skills and knowledges or literacies, such as that we needed to learn how individual letters were shaped. We need to learn how to produce and read the basic components of visual text: point, line, and plane. Then simplest visual element, it has location but no dimension. Line is a point in motion and one-dimensional, only able to extend along one direction. So plane is two-dimensional, having both length and width, together with the effects of light, hue and color, saturation, tonal value, texture and scale, dimension and motion. These three elements make up the visual field that we observe and convey the impression of density, movement, and dimension. By knowing these elements and how they are combined, we have the basic skills to read visual text. That's why, even though it's not included in the book, I decided to teach you about the color schemes and the elements of arts, because somehow I find it necessary for you to understand what we see better and make sense of it. Okay, so we have an example here of a picture. What do you see in the picture? See a person. Do you see movement? Yes, it's a dance, right? But what else do you see? What can you infer looking at this picture? So we can see that it's elevated because of the way it was pictured, it was shot. We can also see the size of the statue. We can also infer that it's an important edifice because it's located outside a building. So take a look at there. So what else? How about this picture here? This is an old picture, I think 1700s, but we can't really do you see a person who actually looks like this guy with his facial structure or facial attributes? Of course not, because this is just a drawing, but we can infer that this is a guy that is his action is turning, is about like answering somebody's questions. So it's understandable, no complication in terms of its interpretation. What else? An image does not need to replicate its subject to be a good likeness. So as you can see in that picture, doesn't really represent the real person, but we can presume that it has a gender, that it observes the fashion and culture during this time. So a man in courtly dress is turning around. Even though there's no movement at all, this is what we call arrested image. Okay, next point. Let me see if we can get some important definitions here. So Bourdieu writes that, ayan, We see and perceive not because we are looking at the world from the outside, but because, yeah, I have read that already. Seeing as literacy, tacit seeing is fine if you simply want to get through the day's responsibilities, but it is insufficient if you want or need to make sense of what we are seeing. Okay, moving on. Then okay, the arrested image is most often associated with the field of photography because photographs perfectly freeze time and motion in a way that no other art form really achieves it. So that's what we mean by arresting reality. Okay, in terms of new technologies of seeing, we can see here that technology is defined variously, of course. We understand it to be a range of objects like tools and other instruments and devices, and we understand it as a sort of knowledge, know-how, and skill. But technology can also be understood as an organizing principle and a processing the way in which a society constitutes itself and its formations, and then brings people and machines together to produce goods and services. So the current era is marked by an incredible range of visual technologies using all the sense of the term presented above. It includes older forms of films, video, and television, and newer ones of computers, internet, and virtual reality, and the scientific mechanism of microscope, telescope, and digital imaging. So what we can take from this is that technology is not just know-how or design devices. It is also a verb, a principle of action. So that ends chapter 1 and 2 of our lesson. So this is the coverage for the first exam supposedly, but we don't want to miss things. So our second exam begins with chapter 3. So I hope you were able to answer these questions as an assignment and be able to define these questions. Okay, I'm still finding time to check on your submissions. What's important is we're catching up on our coverage and we try to make the most out of this course. Okay, I'm deciding for the second exam, we'll have our film viewing. Let's analyze a movie. And I'm thinking of something worthwhile. So I'll be posting probably a copy of the movie entitled I forgot. Seeing numbers or something. I'll just post it here. You will enjoy the movie, and I hope you would see with a trained eye, of course, with the things that you have learned here, you can apply it on watching a movie, that you'll be seeing lots of signs within that visual text. So we end here for tonight, and I might be posting again another video tomorrow just for us to catch up on the coverage. So enjoy your night, and let's just enjoy the course. Don't be so pressured on doing a lot of things. So let's enjoy the moment. Honestly, this ECQ thing I consider it's just one of the best times in our lives, in spite of what's going on outside. But because I've been asking I really like Saturdays or Sundays because it's a free time for me to go out, do things outside of the academics. Now God has given me 2 months of Saturdays and Sundays, free of doing things, not bound by time. So for me, it's a privilege. Not a lot of people have that kind of way of seeing things that way. For them, it's really a difficult moment, especially for those who are not, or have lost their jobs or have no food to eat. But for me, I'm glad because I'm privileged or blessed, we call it even, because somehow it's not as difficult as I imagine. I had my salary has not stopped in spite of the ECQ, and I had the luxury of time to be with my family and to do things which I wish I had time doing, like preparing plants or making pots, um, constructing little things, or even general cleaning in some parts of the house. And of course, having movie times with my family. So, I hope things are doing well with you as well. So, enjoy the rest of the ECQ. This is actually very convenient. You don't have to really go to school and experience traffic or spend money on transportation, but at least we have to invest on a good internet connection and laptops that go with it for us to adjust to the new normal. Okay, so I'll be watching your videos in a short while and giving you grades. So please bear with the delays in checking. So good night, and may God bless us all.